I specifically have found like Latina therapists who are bilingual because I want to be able to work on emoting in Spanish. And the first time I did it, this was probably like a year ago at this point. It's happening. Like I'm getting chills like talking about it because it felt something different unlock when I emoted in Spanish, because in my head I was like, well, I'm not going to really feel the same because it's not my language, but it is.
Yeah.
So it was a very cool experience and a very like an emotional one. And then I'm like, oh, what an experience for my clients to have when they're able to emote and me understand in their language.
Hola, hola. Welcome to Entre Tías y Amiguis, the podcast where we dive into the wild roller coaster ride of adulting. I'm your host, Adri Rodriguez, a queer Salvadorian native, a first-gen trailblazer, and licensed psychotherapist, here to share wisdom, stories, and real talk with my tías and amiguis to inspire and uplift our community. I want to remind you that while I am a licensed psychotherapist, this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Now let's dive into today's conversation and explore the journey of adulting together. Grab your cafecito, get comfy, and let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Entre Tías y Amiguis. I'm your host, Adri Rodriguez, with a very, very special guest, my dear friend, from online friend to real life friend
yes,
now. Stacy Ray, and licensed therapist. And so we're going to be taking a couple different directions, a bit about work, so about some of the journey that you're in personally that I'm like super interested in.
Yeah, that was like our connect point.
Yes, that was like our first conversation. Very beautiful. It's so interesting. And so I'm really excited for all of you to be here. And so to begin, I always start our guests with introducing themselves, like their origin story. How did they get to the point that they're here? Most importantly, I always ask guests to talk about some of those identities that might be relevant for the listeners to keep in mind as they're listening to the story. With that said, why don't you let us know who you are and
all of that,
all of the things.
So my name's Stacy Ray, as you mentioned, as she, her pronouns. I'm from LA, but I'm really excited to be up in Sacramento because I was like, when we decided that I was going to be a guest, I was like, why don't I just come up and visit? So I'm really excited for that. And I get to do this in person. And I really appreciate you having me on in the first place. So that's really exciting. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, again, based in Los Angeles, but I have worked virtually for the past probably 3 years now. My specialty is eating disorders. So I've worked in eating disorder treatment for over the past 10 years, worked at inpatient, residential, PHP, IOP, and now I'm just solely an outpatient, solely outpatient, private practice, all of that. Yeah, I'm Latina, Mexican-American, second gen, daughter, sister, granddaughter, nomad. Yes, a little bit of a digital nomad. I still have my home base. I always call it my Carrie Bradshaw apartment. Like, I'm going to have that apartment forever because I love it. But yeah, I've been lucky enough for, especially working remotely, I get to travel. And I also lucky that I have friends who live in other places. So I get to spend time with them, which I think working virtually has just like fully changed how I lived my life, because I think before it was like, if you want to take a vacation and visit somebody, you have to take time off work. Like you don't get to do that very often. And since working virtually, I feel like I get to be so much more in relationships, even like coming up here. Like I could work a little bit while I'm, traveling up here, or I can like move my schedule in the week so I have the rest of the week off. And I just felt like the quality of my relationships has really been enriched since being able to work remotely. Yeah, what else? Oh yeah, of course. So I've worked in eating disorders for the past 10 years, but probably in the past year, I think probably maybe 2 years since ChatGPT really has come out, I just nerded out over ChatGPT and all the capabilities and all the really resources that it has, but it's really had me want to invest more of my time and energy into seeing how it's going to kind of be a part of the mental health field. And I know there's a lot of clinicians and clients who have different opinions on what that might look like, or really different fears of how it's going to look. Because I think as therapists, or even just really anybody in the medical community, I think we're automatically more skeptical of new technology, as we should be, right? Because we're wanting to protect our clients, their information, and kind of like the sacredness of therapy. And so wanting to, I don't know, just even start conversations with people, because I like how ChatGPT, and I think one of the women that I learned ChatGPT from the School of AI, she said it best, where it's like it levels the playing field. So it really allows people who didn't have access to so many resources and so many education tools. Now we have access to that. So now even just like creating like an Excel spreadsheet, like I didn't know how to do that. I asked ChatGPT and it gave me education. Or like I asked even like how to like edit my website. Didn't know how to do that. Can't always pay for someone to help me with that. And so being able to really utilize it to, again, like help level that playing field and just give more resources to pay people maybe like me or other people who don't have access to it, I think can be really great for mental health. but again, also too, like there's security and all of that. So wanting to, again, facilitate conversations and eventually be like a consultant, like actually provide more of an educational experience for clients and therapists, because it's going to be involved in our mental health care, regardless if people want it to be or not. It's just what I want to be able to do is get in early so we can help set the parameters and the kind of like the rules of like how this is going to go for our clients, and making sure, more importantly, that clinicians don't get taken advantage of and don't get overwhelmed just because we, can do less progress notes. We now have 5 or 10 more clients to do, because there's also obviously the mental tax of doing, 40 clients in a week. And so, so that's kind of been where I've been at in the past, probably like 6 to 8 months of really starting to like dig into that, because there's not really too much conversation going on around it.
Which has been another area that we've connected. Even though today we're not going to be geeking out about AI.
Yeah.
I think like what it makes me think about it connects how you are really a trailblazer. What we're going to be talking about in the interview really ties into like eating disorder, mental health.
Yes.
Not a lot of Latinas in there. No. AI conversations, not a lot of Latinas. And then your own sort of a journey that you're in as a second gen. I think that's another journey that is maybe not super common to see happening. It makes me think about trailblazing.
Yeah, because a lot of my work that I've done in both eating disorders and what's led me into AI is really the work in DEI. So I worked for my Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board prior, and it's really opened my eyes to figure out like, how do we make these experiences more inclusive? And for me, it's been learning Spanish, and like, how do I extend my reach as not just Latina, but also just like a Spanish speaking Latina, and being able to provide those services in Spanish. So like, that's kind of, I know what we're talking about today a little bit more is like, how did I get to that point?
Yeah. So we were talking about what we're going to name your episode, right? That's something that I've been asking guests, and as you listen in the audience, like I've been asking people like, what would you want your episode to be called? And we hadn't like come to that decision, but in the conversations that we've had through the weekend, it popped like this kind of like funny joke that like a Sabo kid, right? And maybe many of you are familiar or consider yourselves like a no Sabo kid, or somebody has put that label on you. And so we're here today to say you can turn into a Sabo kid, and we have
right. Like it doesn't have to always be no Sabo. It can be Sabo or yo sé. Yeah, exactly.
Yo sí sé, right? Yeah. So I'm really excited about all the parts, because I feel that in every conversation that we've had in as we build our friendship, there's just something interesting, because our experiences are so different, but then it's also like we're finding like a way to like, make sense of it. And so I thought that's super cool.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that. Yeah. Because I didn't even really know what a no Sabo kid was till I was like an adult, because it just wasn't anything that someone maybe said behind my back, but not to my face. So I was like, not really
and maybe
sure.
even generationally, I think that this is something like new, perhaps as people have come to realize there's something about how I'm going about life that feels different.
Right.
And as in the last few years, also things like first gen, and because I've been at first gen the entire time that I've been at first gen. I didn't know it was a first gen.
Right. Not identifying it as such. Yeah.
That language, even like 10 years ago when I was in college, we didn't have like a first gen resource center or things like that at the universities that I went to. So there is a lot of cultural sort of nuance that is bringing those new concepts into new terms. So let's jump into that conversation. What made you start thinking about, because in part it's for work, right? Like you named, you want to learn Spanish so your services can be accessible to other folks, particularly, I imagine, because eating disorder space, no Latinos at all, probably no Spanish at all. So as a potentially as a starting point, but like what made you find a need and say, hey, I want to reconnect with this, because you're already doing amazing work. You don't have to do anymore, but something awoke in you that said, I need to reconnect. I want to reconnect. I'm curious. Like, tell us that story.
Yeah. So like I've taken Spanish, probably like most kids in LA, like our whole basically middle school and high school lives. Like I started, I think, Spanish in like, 8th grade and then did all through high school. I minored in Spanish, but like still never knew how to speak Spanish. So like I understood the grammar, but never really learned how to speak it. I went to Spain when I was, I think, right before my senior year of college, to literally get myself to like force myself to speak it.
So this has been going on for a while.
This has been going on for a while. Yeah. And so I got, way more comfortable just literally getting the words out of my mouth when I went to Spain, but then I came home, I didn't speak it. And then, 10 years went by, essentially. Still didn't speak it. I'm trying to even think, like, I remember having like people I dated speak Spanish. I would like try to get them, like I would try to speak in Spanish to them. It really wouldn't like hit. And then finally during COVID, I started taking online classes because I had like basically like a client's parent knew that I was on this journey and or like wanting to learn more. And they're like, oh, I went up to this place, so you should try it. But it was COVID. So all I got were online classes. And I was like, damn, this is really hard. But it wasn't, I think, until, so like I said, I worked in eating disorders. I worked for an online eating disorder treatment center a couple of years ago. And while I was there, I had a bilingual family, Spanish speaking, and it was a family that was obviously trying to help their kid out with their eating disorder. And what that program specialized in was FBT. So like family-based therapy. So the idea was to get everybody involved, which like in theory sounds like, you know, especially for Latinos, like, yeah, we're already involved anyways. Yeah. Like we're showing up for everything altogether. And so we had a grandma who came because she wanted to support her grandchild, and she was only Spanish speaking, and I had to get basically like an online translator come into the sessions. And I've had in-person translators come in sessions, and it's great because it's live translation. They're kind of like whispering behind your ear, and it's quick. This was the most painful experience, not just for me, but I can imagine for the grandmother this is like she's Mexican grandmother, like probably her first time ever. I think it was her first time ever in like a therapy setting. And I was just like cringing so hard because I saw that she was getting frustrated because the translator just was like, the service was just horrible. Like I would speak, they'd be like, okay, hold on. Okay. And then speak to the grandmother. Okay, hold on. And then speak to me. And it wasn't smooth. Also like obviously the stigma of like just therapy in general in the Latino community is like, it's really like not even considered like a thing. But then even when you go, it's like, well, they're knowing all the family secrets. And then we had a different translator each time. So it wasn't even like one they could build connection with. And it was just a really poor experience overall. And like I could kind of understand what they were saying. Like I could kind of understand what the grandma was saying. I could, like, before I got translated to, I could kind of explain what I wanted to say, but not really. And so I left that first session and I was like, I never want to have this experience ever again for myself or for the grandma. Like that poor little grandma had to like, you know, we ended up obviously, she ended up staying and it was fine, but it was like, I know that wasn't equitable service. That wasn't service I wanted to provide. That's also like, I could see how that just deters people from wanting to come to therapy because it was actually really difficult to have flow, to have emotion. And I just literally was like, I'm never going to put myself in this position again. And immediately that's what flipped the switch. And I signed up for like the immersion programs through the school that I was going to. So I went to Oaxaca for the first time for I think 6 weeks, took classes every day, Monday through Friday, 3 hours a day, which was a big shift because I'd been doing an hour one time a week. And so I just threw myself into it. I just was like, I never want, that was really it. I never want this to be my experience or somebody else's experience because it's just not fair, really. And then I just been doing it since. I'm on like I just hit like the end of year 2 of my like real like, okay, my first immersion program. And since then I've done 3, more or less about 4 to 6 weeks. And I take tutoring twice a week for an hour and a half. So,
and you spent the weekend talking Spanish with
I've been speaking Spanish with you, or even at least understanding what y'all are saying. And so it's been really cool to, it's hard to sometimes know how far I've gotten because it's still so hard. Like, like being able to just like understand what y'all are saying or watch TV or listen to music and like be like, oh, or like I finished like my first book in Spanish this year that I read. And I was like, oh, shit, like this, like, okay, I maybe know some Spanish. So it's been really cool. But really that's what switched it into high gear for me, where I was like, I don't want to feel so restricted in this experience. And I would never want someone to have that. And then that was it. Cause I want to say like maybe family stuff, but like no one in my family speaks Spanish other than my mom. And my grandma, her mom did. But like that was never the drive for me to communicate with my family members because nobody speaks Spanish.
So in a way, it's almost like seeing this grandma, I imagine, like connected to this ancestral thread of you that you maybe didn't even have like that connection until like it happened. Right. And you're like, whoa, like there's something here that does not feel right, that is making me miss something. It's like a reflection, but not because I think like sometimes a second generation, I hear something from clients or friends. It's like, I didn't get to talk to my grandma. I didn't get to.
I was just thinking that as you were saying.
I didn't get to do this thing. I went back home and I couldn't talk to anybody. But in your family unit, everybody spoke English. So you could have gone without having actually. Right.
I didn't feel like I missed out on the opportunity to communicate because like my mom's mom is from Mexico, Sonora, Nogales area. She came over when she was 6. And so she's had to learn English really quickly, like went immediately into English speaking school. So, but in the house, she spoke Spanish for the most part because my grandpa only spoke Spanish in the house. As far as I remember, I was little. I didn't ever feel like I missed out on communicating with her because she spoke in English. But yeah, like when I think of like speaking now, when I think I'm like, damn, like how cool would it have been to like speak to my grandma in Spanish? That's something that I'm like, oh, like always kind of gets me sometimes where I'm like, oh, that would have been cool to communicate with her and her to see me do this process, kind of like go in the reverse of what she did, right? She came over here to like have this experience, or regardless if she chose it, she was 6. So her mom chose it for her. How I'm going like backwards in that process where like, oh no, I want to go back to Mexico and learn the language and learn the customs and learn the culture, and like how she would think about all of these things, because she at one point wasn't allowed to go back, right? Because she never was able to become a full citizen, and so she was afraid to get stuck in Mexico and not be able to come back. So at one point she stopped going. But yeah, no, I didn't ever have that feeling of like, oh, I couldn't communicate with her. And I think, you know, I know a lot of people do have that experience where they have grandparents that they never spoke to, and like that, yeah, there's so much loss in that.
And even then, there is this loss that you're talking about in there, because the emotional language that sometimes like gets not completely lost, but it's like when I say something in Spanish and then I say it in English, like I know even when I've had therapy with like somebody who's not a Spanish speaker, my therapist as a white woman would be like, just say it in Spanish and then translate it for me. Because she's like, I'm not so worried that I need to understand, but it's like, I need you to feel it, saying it how you feel it inside. And then, right, like then we go translating it for the purpose
to, like, get it out
of processing, but to be able to like honor it. And then for me, as a native Spanish speaker, I know that there are some things that they just don't hit the same when I say them in English. Like as you spend kind of like the weekend with me and my wife, that you see that we're constantly like in and out of Spanish and English, because especially for me as a native Spanish speaker, now I'm just like, my brain is constantly in ways that I don't recognize. So when I'm with monolingual folks, to labor to be like, do not talk in Spanish right now because they don't know what's happening. And so it's such an interesting experience of like all of the layers of laws, the connection that really exists within language and the cultural
restrictiveness almost. Because it's funny because I forgot who I was talking to the other day, but I was like, I'm afraid I'm not going to have personality in Spanish. Like, I know how to speak it, but like in English, there's so many like terms or slang that I use.
Like the sass.
Right. The sass of it. And like, I don't know those words in Spanish because that's more of the slang or like the not formal that I'm kind of learning through my teacher, but like at some point you just have to learn it in the world. And I'm like, oh, I'm afraid I'm not going to have personality because when I try to talk to him, and sometimes thinking too much of an English brain, I'll try to translate my slang in English. And it like doesn't make any sense. Because I tried to say to my teacher the other day and he was like, I don't know what you're saying. Oh, like that ain't even right. Like something like that where it's like, it's English, but not as a cut version of English, but it doesn't really translate. You can't say like, that is not even justified. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. Like that ain't even right. Like whatever you do, that ain't even right. And like, it's like a comical piece or, you know what I mean? And I'm still trying to find that in Spanish. And so that's where it's like, I feel restricted sometimes when I express in Spanish, even though I can still have tone. I can still have like my mannerisms with my hands, which I do all the time. But yeah, it's been interesting to feel like restricted in Spanish, but then I've done like a couple therapy sessions in Spanish, like my therapy. So like I specifically have found like Latina therapists who are bilingual because I want to be able to work on emoting in Spanish. And the first time I did it, this was probably like a year ago at this point. It unlocked some shit that I don't know what it unlocked, but I was like, oh, this feels different. And I thought it was going to be different, like hard, because I thought I was going to be so in my brain about like what I was feeling. Because we were talking about emotional topic. And so I was getting emotional, but like something felt different of how I was expressing. And I was like, oh, this is generational shit.
Yeah.
Like my ancestors processed feelings and emotions in a different language that they expressed them to me, or that I learned how to express, but like something I don't know what's happening. Like I'm getting chills like talking about it because it was just like, I don't know what it was, but I felt something different, like unlock when I emoted in Spanish. Because in my head, I was like, well, I'm not going to really feel the same because it's not my language, but it is.
Yeah.
So it was a very cool experience and a very like an emotional one, like in a good way. And even just being able to get through doing a therapy session for an hour in Spanish was like a whole thing of itself, because I was like, oh, we'll do this for 15 minutes. My therapist was like, we're at the 50-minute mark. And I was like, boom, just started crying because I was like, oh, I got to this point. I was able to emote like all of these things wrapped in one, which was really cool. And then I'm like, oh, what an experience for my clients to have when they're able to emote and me understand in their language that they learned how to have language in, or even if they didn't, right? Like I'm not second, well, I am second gen, but I mean like I'm learning Spanish, but still getting the feelings.
That is so amazing. Yeah, it makes me think about, for me, because my therapist right now speaks Spanish. And I've noticed that I don't want to speak Spanish to her. And it has been because I am super intellectualized. Like I really vibe with her and like therapist to therapist. Like I'm still a client, but I love kind of like the inside of being a therapist. And I know how to be a therapist mainly in English. Right? I do therapy in Spanish, but it's like so far in
that's
between.
Right. Yeah, especially because we learned how to do therapy.
Right,
in English.
Learned therapy in English, so I find it that even though she speaks Spanish, I don't necessarily want to go into Spanish. But I think it is because it's my own intellectualizing and protection in a way, where it's just like I get to stay like, nah, today, this session, I'm just going to stay in English and I'm not going to touch it in Spanish.
I'm not going to go so
because
deep.
The moment that I go in Spanish, something's going to tap that I don't even have an idea what's coming. And that is always such a fascinating experience.
Is so interesting. Yeah, that it becomes like a distancing behavior.
So thinking about this conversation, because with the whole no Sabo kid and everything, right? Sometimes it's like funny, haha, like we see it online, there is products, but there is actually a lot of shame. I also think in terms of calling people that and what we're implying about a person who is disconnected or never learned Spanish. There's something about it, at least in my perception, and so I'm curious about how you interpret it, that it almost puts the responsibility on the individual to say, you didn't learn Spanish, you don't care enough about the culture, you didn't. It's almost like a individual sort of flaw or like a gap. But in my perspective, this is systemic as as fuck. Like you did not get to not know Spanish, right? Because you don't want to. Right. That grandma that was brought here at 6 years old probably wasn't allowed to speak Spanish. Right. Probably could have gotten in trouble at that point speaking in Spanish at the school. In public places, Public places. So systemically, there's this erasure that happens for safety that has led to a generation of young adults, kids who are disconnected from that ancestral lineage. And even say that Spanish is still the language of a colony. One day we'll do therapy. Now what makes a systemic issue, right? Like nobody. And so, for example, if you're somebody who's listening to this episode and you have been called a no Sabo kid and somebody has made fun of you because you said that word, and then you're like, I'm never speaking in Spanish again. I want to say this is not your fault. This is not something that you did or didn't do. Safety, protection, always trumps everything, and you will do whatever is the safest. Every time that I say a word, I say it wrong. I don't roll my R right. I don't do these things. I'm going to shut down and not want to do it. And so I think it's important for the ones that as they speak Spanish, that we're also mindful that we may be sometimes creating barriers for folks. And so just thinking about that systemically, what have you come to realize about how did you get to be second gen and have that thread get lost somewhere along the way?
I definitely think like through learning Spanish, even just like within both. So when I say both sides of my family, there's like my mom's side and my dad's side. So my mom's side, like I said, my grandma was from Mexico. So that's, I feel like they were a lot more connected to Mexican culture. Whereas my dad's side, and it's funny though, because my mom's side is the lighter skin side. So they don't necessarily always present like, I don't know. It's not, you can't always tell they're Mexican, I guess sometimes, depending on what time of year it is, honestly. Like sometimes I'm real light, sometimes I'm darker. And then my dad's side, they're all darker, like more, I don't know, more stereotypical Mexican looking, like really dark hair, a little bit more voluptuous, or like the women, because we have so many women on my dad's side of my family, and the men are outnumbered. It's like 10-1 outnumbered. But none of them.
So if you were looking at them and you said, which side speaks Spanish? If you
they would look at my dad's side. They would look at my dad's side because they're, tall, darker, just more of the features. It's been interesting because my dad's side doesn't speak, like my dad's side, he has 3-4 brothers. Wait, Uncle, hold on, before I go, Rudy, Uncle Tom.
Sorry, uncles.
Rudy, Uncle Tom, Uncle Mike. Oh, 3. And then their sister, my Auntie Lorraine. None of them grew up speaking Spanish. I didn't know till I started learning, like really started learning in the past 2 years, that his parent, my grandparents spoke Spanish. I had no idea. I knew they spoke, I would call it like street Spanish. So like my dad's side grew up in Boyle Heights, so which was like very Latino, centrally located area. I would hear my grandma speak to the neighbors in Spanish a little bit. So I just assumed she knew like little terms, but she was a fluent Spanish speaker, but they never spoke it. And for I think learning Spanish now and understanding, like I know you said earlier, like it's not the fault of the person, but I also like got a lot more empathy for why my parents haven't taught me, because my mom speaks it, and me and my sister and my brother would always joke with my mom of like, how could you not teach us? Like now we have to take classes and do all this stuff, and like we still kind of joke about it, but kind of really understanding a little bit more of like the history of it, especially like in LA where you couldn't, like it was not necessarily illegal to speak Spanish in public, but it was super looked down upon, and especially in schools. And it did make it a more unsafe community. And then where my dad grew up, he grew up again in Boyle Heights in like the 70s. So it was a lot of like race riots that were going around, and ICE was in the streets and all of those. So it was safer to not have a Spanish or a Mexican Spanish accent. I guess Mexican accent feels similar because it is kind of like there is like a Mexican accent in LA. Right. And so but even if you don't speak Spanish. So that's funny because my grandma was like, well, I didn't want them to have an accent. But I'm like, they have an accent. Sound like they're from that part of LA. Not all the time. Again, code switching becomes involved in all of that. But yeah, it's lost the train of thought we were going with this. But yeah, like my dad none of my dad's side speaks it, but they're all married. All my dad's brothers married women who speak Spanish. But none of their kids learn Spanish. And then my mom's side, none of my aunts and uncle, well, growing up, my mom didn't learn Spanish till she was 13 when she went to Mexico, even though her parents spoke Spanish in the house. And she didn't really have to respond in Spanish. So she went to Mexico when she was 13 for the summer and then like picked it up, right? And then kind of would keep going back and visit, but her siblings didn't learn it. And then now my auntie knows Spanish now because for her job. So kind of similar to me, she started working in a more heavily Latino population. So she's like, I want to learn Spanish and then learn Spanish. So like much later, like I think she was in her 40s or something when she learned it. So, but like her kids don't know Spanish.
What is it like to be kind of like the cousin, the daughter that is showing up and saying, I understand why you all didn't learn Spanish, why you didn't teach me, why we did this, safety. I'm also a therapist, I get it. But here I am. And I'm going to do it anyway. Even you were sharing with me that when you go to Oaxaca to the Spanish program, you're like the only Latina that's there.
Yeah, that is always such a trip. And I don't think I expected that. But yeah, it feels, and I always joke with my therapist about this, and maybe I'll share this with her, but I'm like, I always feel like, why am I the only one? Like, why? Like, there's, I think sometimes like, not a pressure, but it kind of feels like I'm alone in this sometimes of like, why am I the only one who wants to do this? Or why am I the only one who wants to push for this? Or, you know, in these situations where I feel like, yeah, I don't have anyone to share in this experience with. And which is why obviously stuff like social media is so helpful, because you find other people who are in that similar situation. But I think within my family unit, it's prompted a lot more conversation now that I'm like, even just going to Mexico, even around safety, right? Like, well, are you going to be safe there? It's like, well, why do you think it's not safe? Right. So like some internalized racism stuff came up, or even just really learning more about like why my parents really didn't speak Spanish or really didn't learn Spanish, or like how they got treated when they were trying to speak Spanish and it didn't come out right. Because even like me growing up, like we would say certain words in English, well, like for example, like cilantro. I don't say cilantro ever, even though I never spoke Spanish. I always say cilantro, but when I would say it like in a group of, I don't know, like my white friends, they'd be like, oh, say it again. Right. They would kind of do that, like, oh, like say it with your accent. And in my head, I was like, that's just how you say it. Yeah. Right. And so it felt like, okay, well, maybe I don't want to do this. And then going to like Oaxaca to learn Spanish and being the only Latino person trying to taking classes. I was like, this is so weird. Like, where's everybody else? Yeah. And like, I remember literally meeting like one kid who was younger than me finally, like and I had already gone there twice. So I'd already been there for 8 weeks total at that point. It was like the first time I saw another Latino learning Spanish. And I was like, this, and I'm sure there's other Latinos who go to different countries and learn, but like, I again felt like, oh, I'm learning this language, but I'm with the Spanish teachers. People think I'm a teacher when they get there, which is a whole other experience, but it's a bunch of, typically like either like white people not just even from America, like white people from different countries.
Coming to have an immersion cultural
experience. And so it was really interesting. And I specifically remember when I went for Dia de los Muertos, they were creating an altar for Dia de los Muertos, or the school was, and they were doing like an educational thing. And I didn't go because I was like, it's so weird to me to be around all these white people learning about my culture while I don't feel connected to the students, but I am a student and I do want to learn about this, but it just felt weird to almost, it not kind of felt like an animal in the zoo, but a little bit like I feel like they are observing the culture that they're not necessarily a part of, while I'm a part of it and like absorbing it differently. And it just didn't feel aligned. So I didn't end up going, and I made my own little altar in my room and it was fine. But like, I didn't feel like I fit in when that is my, like, I'm not from Oaxaca, but like the Mexican culture, but I didn't feel like I wanted to necessarily fit in with that group. And so that had been an experience when I went to Oaxaca. And then my cousins.
Yes, your family. Because you're coming in and being like, in this 3 generations, I want to speak Spanish.
Yes.
Everybody's like, why? Or what do they?
Right. I think they were confused probably at first, like why all of a sudden? Because like I'd always kind of taken it, but I never really used it. My parents are always like supportive of all like my adventures that I do, which is I always appreciate. I went to Oaxaca and never been there. They'd never been there. I like didn't really do that much research, and they was like, okay, like be safe, you know, like we trust you, but also it's scary out there. But yeah, I think it's prompted more little messages on Instagram from my cousins, like even them saying, oh, you know, grandma doesn't like speaking Spanish. And in my head, I was like, hey, I've never tried to speak to this woman in Spanish because I just learned she spoke Spanish. And then B, I was like, oh, how, like, why? And it's like, well, because she doesn't want to be like seen in that way, right? And I was like, seen in what way?
Oh, there's so much in there.
So much in there. And like, I haven't like pressed my grandma for it because, you know,
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't know, trigger something that I'm not ready to have a conversation about. But I'm also like, but none of y'all speak Spanish. So I'm just gonna play dumb, and I'm gonna start speaking in Spanish to my grandma. This is my dad's side, and see what happens. And she speaks Spanish to me. It's not all the time, and it's been interesting to watch her speak to Spanish to me when it's just me and her versus like when our kids come into the house. So like I think it's kind of everyone's having their own experience now that I'm speaking Spanish. Because even like when I speak to my mom and my like dad doesn't know Spanish, I can tell he gets a little bit like I think he's trying to figure out. And like, I won't, you know, I know he'll listen to this and maybe have his own opinion, but we're working on how do I practice my Spanish with my mom who speaks Spanish and get that connection, which is really cool, but not make you feel left out of the conversation. Because like, yeah, I don't want to be rude, but I'm also too like, my assumption is that there's a part of him that wants to learn and wants to be connected to that part of him. But he also has a history of like being told, no, you shouldn't learn this and it's bad and people are going to treat you differently or like jump you. And like, because he grew up in like Boyle Heights, which was a rough place to live. So I think there's a lot of wrapped up that comes up for him watching me do this. And even just going back to Mexico. Like, I know my parents, they're very proud of me and they'll always say that. And they're very supportive in what I do, but I think it's interesting. I can imagine it's interesting for them watching their kid go backwards, right? Like go back to where we came from or where our family's from. And then so I have 2 siblings, and now my sister will come with me. And she's starting to get interested in learning in Spanish, which is really, I think, really cool. Because then I'm like, oh yeah, we're like this is where I'm like, oh, we're doing it together. And like, maybe it did just take me to be the only one to now other people are like coming in. Even just like the process right now of getting my dual citizenship. My mom, again, goes along with me on my adventures. She had no interest in getting her Mexican citizenship through her mom ever. I don't think she ever thought about it until I brought it up. Just going through this process of like learning Spanish and just feeling more in touch with like where I come from. Even though I'm not from Oaxaca, or not, especially not even from southern Mexico, I'm from like my family's from northern Mexico, if anything, still wanting to be a part of it and like feeling like there's like a birthright to it where it's like, I'm from here, I want to be a part of it. And my grandma, even though my grandma came over with her mom really young, like I still feel more connected and I want to be like I'm there. And there's a part of me that is from there. And so I was like, okay, now I want to get my citizenship. Like I want to figure out what that would look like. So I have both because I'm both American and a Mexican, right? And so my grandma has passed on my mom's side. So my mom had to get her citizenship first. And it was like having to learn that my grandma came over and whether she Americanized her names or the government Americanized her name, she had 6 different versions of her name that we had to go through because she had her Mexican name. So it was like her first name, her middle name, her mom's last name, her dad's last name, right? And then she came here and then dropped the mom's last name. And then when she got married, on some things she kept her name and her married name, and then some she dropped it. So my mom's birth certificate, we had to change basically. So just even interesting knowing how hard it is probably for some people to find their lineage because they have so many different names. And I was like, how, thankful am I that it was close enough where we could figure it out.
Yeah.
Whereas like some people just lose that. Like we haven't really gone much further in like the genealogy of like figuring out, great grandparents, but I'm assuming it'd be difficult because everyone had different names, and especially if they came here or came somewhere else, it's like they Americanized the names for safety, or because the government was like, well, no, you're not Mary, you're not Marie anymore, you're Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom got her citizenship 2 months ago, and then I'm in the process, and then I'll have dual citizenship, which is like a whole another, I think, just connective experience.
Oh my gosh, like my brain is like on fire, like with 1,000 things, because my specialty as a therapist is generational healing, right? And it's because I believe that through the generations of suffering, safety, colonization, supremacy, all the systems have this impact of separating us away from who we are at the core. Like who we are meant to be, who our people were, because of all these reasons that are never your fault. They're never you chose to No, this is all by design of the powers that be. And so in my work with generational healing, right, it's like from our behaviors, from how we say our name, from how we hide, how we code switch, how we all of those things show up and impact and are deeply connected to our mental health, right? Because what it's like to emote in English versus emoting in Spanish, like all of that, like the way that our ancestors and our family, the ones that came before, they give us messages, whether verbal or nonverbal, we were supposed to be and what lane we're supposed to stay on. And so what I really love about my clients and perhaps why our friendship has like taken off is because you have like that same, for me as a person who left my country when I was 16, I was like, I am never losing this. Like I came here, I was super judgmental of all the Latinos that didn't speak Spanish because I didn't understand, because I grew up like, what do you mean like you guys don't speak Spanish? Right? And so learning the systemic reasons of how a person gets to this point has been so empowering, but also has allowed to build like a level of compassion of just like, dang, like everything that got lost, and how do we help and support your journey to coming back to self and coming back to that authentic version of you. But when we're doing like, oh no, Sabo kid, when we're laughing, when we're like, oh, that's so cute, because I have the reverse. When I say my words with a Spanish accent, people be like, oh, that's so cute, say it again. And it's so annoying, and it's so like, it makes me want to like hide it even more. And so all of these things, I think at the end of the day, like really can have this impact on like knowing ourselves deeply and multi-layer, because of safety, we've been told this is the only way to be a Latina. This is the way that in my family, Latinas
this is how you have to show up. There's like the language part of it, right? And then there's like the aesthetics part of it. Like that I was talking about, like my mom's side is more light and my dad's side is more dark, and they look more traditionally Mexican, which even sounds weird to say because obviously Mexicans look all different ways. And you think of like colonization and all of that kind of stuff. How I wanted to show up in the past is what being Mexican looks like. And I remember when I was really little, I did like acting for like a minute. But when you go to interviews, they ask you what your race is. And they had race and nationality. I remember it was like a conversation with my parents. I'm like, what do I say? I'm American, but they don't look at me that way.
They're not going to pick you for an American role.
They're not going to pick me for an American role. And so I was like, I don't even think we would say Hispanic at that point, right? And so I go, but you mark white first, and then you mark Hispanic. So then I would just like mark obviously both, but then I would present like, oh no, say you're Mexican American. And even being little and like having to understand what that means, like especially that Mexican comes first. I'm Mexican first and then American, right? When you see me, you still see Mexican. I think we were talking about this the other day, like right? Like when I go to Mexico, like, hey, like they'll say it nicely, but it doesn't feel nice. Like, but it's like also too like that's where the colorism comes in. Why does it have to be a negative if this is what we all look like? You know what I mean? We're all different shades.
It makes me think of this other part of the conversation we're having. When you're in Mexico, you're a güera. When you're in LA, you are just Mexican. And then when you were in Pennsylvania, because you went to school,
they definitely know it was not white in Pennsylvania.
You are Mexican.
They might have, they were like, this person is not white for sure. Yeah, it was like the most Mexican person or even really just Latino person I've ever met. There's a lot of like Puerto Ricans and Dominicans on the East Coast, but like, Mexicans were like, not very many of us. So it's been
well, I want to commend just like the strength of your spirit to go through this process, because I know the system sets it up so you're discouraged to do this, because we're seeking closest to whiteness, right? And in a
Mhm.
way, when you look the way that we do,
Mhm.
and we have the hair that we have,
Right.
the only maybe avenue to get as close as possible
Mhm.
to white supremacy, which is
Right.
a privileged stance, is losing
Mhm.
the cultural parts of
Yep.
our language, of our history, of our food, of our
Mhm.
right. And so, what a journey to be on, where you're coming back to self, like I had said earlier, but on purpose.
Right.
It's not just like, oh, like it's whatever. Like you genuinely have gone in a soul searching process
Yeah.
as to why this is important to you.
Yeah.
And in that, maybe whether that was your intention or not, I'm sure
No.
that you're breaking cycles and
Yeah.
and now like what are your nieces or nephews? What are the next generation?
yeah.
You know, like what are the people that you become the ancestor for?
Right.
Have like a stop point of potentially say, like, well, my tia Stacy, like she learned Spanish. Like, can I learn Spanish too? Well, perhaps you didn't have like a tia or like a person, right? Like
Right. That was pressing that.
that was
Yeah.
pressing it. And here you are like, peace, I'm gonna go be in Oaxaca for
I'm
months.
just gonna leave. Yeah, it really, because when I started speaking, it was not the intention of where it is now, or like how I feel about it now, is definitely not where I thought I was going.
Yeah.
The experience has just continued to build upon itself. Just because I don't think you can know all the things. I don't think I would ever have guessed that if I started speaking in Spanish in my therapy sessions, it would unlock something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like those are just things that I don't.
Yeah, how would you know?
How would you know, right? And so even just like the resistance of speaking Spanish, right? Or the resistance of learning Spanish, going back to where it was like, and, right? That's how it effectively erased the language, right? It was an effective, unfortunately, a tool for white supremacy to be like, you can't speak in Spanish. So that erased the language for a majority of people who are my age and my parents' age. So learning Spanish now really feels in line, even more so with what I was doing anyways, in terms of DEI work and just an act of resistance, right? Like you motherfuckers didn't allow my parents to speak it openly, or didn't allow their parents to even want to teach it to my parents. Yeah. And fuck you. And I'm going to learn anyways. And I'm going to speak it in the street or at the store with my mom. You can still see people's reactions even now. Sometimes if I go to Vallarta, which is like a Mexican grocery store in LA, and I speak Spanish, I can tell sometimes people are like, do you speak Spanish? Do you not? Do I speak English? Do I say hola? Do I say buenos dias? Or do I say hi? So I have to start it. And then they know to speak Spanish. But
set
when
the
they
stage.
To set the stage. But then when I go to like Vaughn's and I'm speaking with my mom, people are doing a little bit more like, oh, they're speaking in Spanish, right? Because the demographic is different when you're at Vaughn's versus when you're at Vallarta. But either way, and I think maybe me speaking it has allowed her to feel a little bit more comfortable speaking in Spanish in public places too. Because I think I noticed when I was like in high school, I remember I have this like memory of like we were in Costco and I was learning Spanish in high school and I yelled something in Spanish and she like would not interact in Spanish with me. She would only interact in English. And I was like, oh, I wonder why that was. And I can assume that, there was a little bit like hesitation for us to be yelling. It's probably just yelling in general, but yelling in Spanish in Costco. But now I feel, I can tell her even level of comfortability with Spanish is improved because she spoke it when she was a nurse. And so she spoke it at work. But other than that, she never spoke it in the house. And when she did speak to it, it would be her mom or her dad. And when they passed away, she had no one else. So again, like effectively cutting the line of her, it's not relearn Spanish, but like work those muscles again.
And then to me, my mind goes in like the identity of being a daughter in Spanish versus a mom in Spanish. Because right?
Yeah.
Like she's like somebody's daughter where like the mom is carrying and they potentially had this connection in Spanish. But now she's in this position of being your mom and the cultural like gifting and the generosity and like
she wasn't parent. She wasn't parent. There was definitely Spanish words always being used in my household. So like leche or like lengua, like learning the body parts, like all of those parts, like they were definitely utilized. Like, but I wasn't like parented in Spanish by my mom. I was parented in Spanish by my grandma, like siéntate, cállate, tranquilase, or like tranquilase. No, is that a word?
Tranquilízate.
Yeah. Like chill.
Tranquilízate, chill.
Yeah. More of those words. So like that, I remember getting parented in Spanish, but my mom didn't ever parent me in Spanish. So now that I'm an adult and she still parents me. And so it's, I didn't even think about that, like how that is for her to have to like, I wonder if she feels, I'm going to get a little emotional. Like, I wonder if she feels closer to her mom. Parents me in Spanish. Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah. Because I never thought about that because she got parented in Spanish but she didn't parent me in Spanish. But now she gets, it's kind of like when you say something from your mom and you're like, oh, like my mom used to say that. I wonder now if she's getting that, but in Spanish, which I can ask her because we talk about that. But that's so sweet. I liked that. Thank you for that.
It's different because like I feel two different people.
Yeah.
Like being fluent in both.
Right.
Oh, there is like a two different person. You know, my wife, we traveled a couple years ago to El Salvador for the first time together because she's Salvadorian American. In similar experience of just like, wait, we both Salvadorian, but like our lives couldn't be further apart. So when we were in El Salvador, she got to see me for the first time in Spanish with my friends, with the people that I had grown up in. And I would like catch her. Maybe I haven't like directly asked this question, but it's just like, I assumed that I felt like a different human, like a different person, because I speak in Spanish with my cousins or my sibling, with like people, clients and stuff like that. But the way that when I was with like my friends that I grew up with, going to elementary school, middle school, high school, it's like, you know, en Salvador tenemos la palabra chachalaqueando. It's just like, and you're like cackling.
And it's like, how do you like, I don't even, this is where I'm like, maybe I do have personality in Spanish, because I'm like, I know I emote differently in Spanish, or even just when I talk to people who are like Latinos, like in general, I'm more like, I don't know, I feel bigger in a good way, right? Like I feel more expressive, or even like using my hands and using, I don't know, just more sass behind it, or just like more joy behind it, truly. Like when I'm like laughing with my friends who, are like from the, you know, like my Latina friends, it's just different. What it called, like chismeando is different, right? Like how you talk about it is different. And like I wonder now when I'm speaking in Spanish, how my parents perceive me, or even like the guy I'm dating, for example, talking, even just like last night, like talking in Spanish to you when I'm obviously not speaking in Spanish to them. And I'm like, oh, I wonder how that is for them to experience me, not just with friends, but in a different language with friends. And I thought about that for like a blip of it last night. And I was like, oh, I wonder how that is. I can't imagine it. I don't imagine that it's negative. Even I remember when I was little watching my mom and my grandma sit at the table speaking Spanish to each other. And I was fascinated by it because I didn't know what they're saying. Like I could pick up little words, but like I just remember being like, oh, how cool. Like that's them. That's a language for them. Like I remember knowing that it was special, opposed to something that was like, well, why are they doing that? Both my parents had very different experiences in Spanish, whereas my mom's side was a lot more open to speaking Spanish, or like more comfortable. Like they spoke it in the house and whatever. And my grandma was an ESL teacher or ESL aide. So she did it for her job at one point, so she could come back to speaking it in public. Whereas my dad's side just didn't have that feeling to connect in that way. But it's funny because it's like both sides feel Mexican, right? But they just feel it in different ways.
And like my best guess would be that if we tracked it, because I think that that's a lot of the work that I do with sometimes, you know, when I think about like why some of my clients pick me is because I know how to be in your world as an English speaker, and then I can be the culture broker for your family and be able to explain like the two worlds. Like that is something that I really, really love as a bilingual therapist, even when the clients are not coming in to do work in Spanish, but being able to have like the connection of the culture. And so a lot of the work that I do is like tracking it. How did you get to lose it? How did you get disconnected? Because I think it allows, like with your family, right? There's two Mexican families having such different experiences. I bet if we tracked it and we mapped it, we would see exactly where some of those monumental points that were like, this is not safe. We're not doing this. This is not okay. This is not appropriate. And it takes curiosity and compassion that when you're being made fun of, when you're being shamed for not doing it, like that is so far away from like, why did we get here? So maybe that is a part for me as I was thinking about our energy that I really wanted to pass on to our audience, because the Entre Tías y Amiguis, right? Like people have asked me, like, can I listen to your podcast? Because the name is in Spanish. And it's just like, but I'm a Latina who's bilingual, who is navigating into this two world. And I am going to speak in English in the podcast. But there's this whole way that my life is in Spanish. And so how do I stop dividing myself so much? And that is by inviting even another guest like that I want to bring in to say, like, you are my amigues and you're somebody's tia, even if in your culture and your language is something else, because we all have reasons why we have either stay connected or stay disconnected. For me as a 16-year-old, if I lost my connection to my language, El Salvador would have been devastating to me, because that is all I knew. Like it was, I was too old to disconnect from it. I could have not survived. But for a variety of reasons, other people might, you know, not realize that that's something that is important to them.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely been like different factors, like so I was closest to my mom's mom, and she was the Spanish speaking one. Her house just like felt like Mexican. My house now looks kind of like her house just because I have so many of her things still. So I think when she died, it felt like that part of our family died with her, because she was kind of like, she even just like being like Mexican Catholic, she would still have the Virgin of Guadalupe everywhere. And she was the cook. She knew how to make all the Mexican foods. And so when she died, that part kind of went with her, because my mom didn't learn how to cook what she cooked. Like some of my uncles know how to do it. So like we kind of still stay connected, but like I felt like I lost a big part of like my, I don't know, Mexican identity in that way, or like my connection to like proxy, right? So because I never really had to think about it, because I was like, oh, this is just how we live. And then when she died, I was like, oh, I don't have that anymore, right? Even though I know I'm still Mexican, where even if my grandma passed, but like there felt like a big gap that had happened. And then you add in Trump had got elected the first administration. It's like it's resistance to be Mexican now. Right, where I didn't ever really think about it that before, because I live in LA, so I think we were kind of in a protective bubble of how people felt about, you know, Latinos or Mexicans specifically. And so I think those two parts, I think, started it. Now it's a lot of other things, but it's like now where I am, I want to be like my most Mexican self. Like I think I posted something the other day, like in every life I would choose to be Latina. Like that is really it, where I like understand what that means more now as getting older, and understanding why some people speak the language, why some people don't, that it's even a colonized language to begin with. So I'm like, well, why am I, fucking spending all this money learning colonized language? But I was like, no, it's still in my generation of people. It still means something to, like, again, when I spoke in Spanish or emoted in Spanish for the first time and I felt that thing unlock, I'm like, oh, this is why I'm learning Spanish, right? Like, I can learn an indigenous language, but if my ancestors didn't really, maybe when I do learn it and it unlocks something at some point, cool. Yeah. But like my grandma spoke Spanish. She didn't speak an indigenous language. So it's like those things I'm more proud of. And I think especially how the world looks now, just want to be more out there as this person who is, like a no Sabo kid who is now like, oh no, you can actually learn it. And like, it's not as scary, and it takes a lot of fucking work. Like I will add that, like worked my ass off for 2 years trying to get where I am now, while living in a world that, isn't necessarily wanting me, or me as like the Latina, or me as the Mexican American, or me as the second gen to be as confident or as proud as I am. So again, that's why I think we've talked about it a lot. There's this feeling like I'm going in the reverse of what either people want me to do or how things have happened. So it's been just like a really interesting experience to just be doing it right now, especially as an adult, like especially as like I'm already, I just turned 37, and it's like I'm just learning it now.
Well, even the social positioning as we record this episode, because it's not going to come until later, but we're recording right at the wake of the protests that are going on following the ICE. So there is that, when you said like right now, being Mexican, and like when we're seeing the people in the protests waving Mexican flags, there's been like some discourse online about you should be waving American flags and this and that. But the resistance is coming back to ourselves while still being American, and recognizing and affirming that a part of us will always, no matter geographically where we're situated, we will be connected to this history that is also a painful history, but is a history of like the origin, like where you come from.
Right. Yeah. And I think with any of the stuff that's negative that happens, right, like the ICE raids or even Trump getting elected twice, it's only pushed me to want to know more. And I'm assuming that experience is not just my own. Even just owning a Mexican flag. When I was in Mexico, I bought like a Mexican soccer jersey. I don't even watch soccer like that, but I was like, I want something that displays that part of myself, right? And so then now when I'm in LA and like the ICE raids, where I was like, I wore that jersey like 4 days this past week, because I was like, wherever I am in the street, I want people to know that either they're safe or that like we're all in this together.
And there's tremendous privilege in that, because that goes back to why you're in this position to begin with, is because the safety, the type of privilege and the type of layers that the people that you come from didn't have, and you're reclaiming and making space for all of it right now.
Yeah, I can feel safer going out to Vallarta wearing my Mexican jersey, knowing that if ICE does come, I have documentation. And I know right now that doesn't feel 100% safe for people, but like, I'm still wanting to be like, no, I'm here. You're safe. I'm an educated individual in case something happens, even just like, driving around and making sure things are okay. And then even honestly, just like you said, privilege and access, and what I thought too, like it has been a privilege to be able to pay my way into learning Spanish, because it's also not like the cheapest, when you go to Mexico, it's not as expensive it is in the States.
Not only the resource of money, the resource of time, the resource of the emotional stuff, the travel, all of the things, like different layers, which brings that compassionate lens. I hope that people can hear that. Yes, you can do it. You can go from no Sabo to see Sabo 100%. But what it's going to take is going to be such an individual journey that is going to be so layered. And I think for people on my end, we are bilingual, we have that connection to the culture. Like, I think that for me has been like the intentional recognition that this didn't happen just because, that this happened for reasons that were out of control. And how do I become a welcoming person like this whole weekend, right? Like, this is not a weekend to be like, oh, you didn't say that wrong. This is a weekend for you to, especially as Salvadorian, because you get to be around Salvadorian Spanish, you're being like, this is a word that we say, and this is a thing that we say, right? And because it's almost like it feels like a I have a responsibility to usher my friend into the culture safely. Versus perhaps in other ways, people are like, just like, why do you want to do this? Like, no, like you're butchering the language, or you don't sound good, and that is not the job. Like, the responsibility is to usher you into this journey that you're in, and like feel like a privilege to be able to like laugh and teach you all the
I love it.
words that we were doing.
Yeah, because I really have been lucky. I've been finding like the school that I went to in Oaxaca, and I feel very cared for by them, and having like honestly the online community, like even just like telling people I was learning Spanish, because I knew I was gonna have to speak it on camera, and that was a part where I was like, I know I'm going to say the wrong words. I know I'm going to get corrected, but I also had like faith that I'm choosing the right people to follow me. Right. And I, knock on wood, have even people who are like, I'll type something on my Instagram story and someone will correct my grammar, but they'll do it in such like a sweet way. Like, I hope that's okay. It's like, no, like, I want to know this. I don't want to always ask like ChatGPT to like correct my Spanish every time. Like, I think people feel like I feel connected to people, but I think people are also feeling connected to me, of like helping me on this journey. And that I feel very privileged by, where I do have these people who are supporting me to learn it. I got a comment by somebody who was like, well, you'll never sound like a native speaker, right?
Why would anybody say that?
I was like, why do we need to say that? Like, yes, I could like maybe in theory know that, but like that, like I'm not trying to fool anybody either that I'm native. I'm not trying to fool anybody either that I grew up in Mexico and I like spoke Spanish as my first language. Like, that's not my intention. And those comments are very few and far between, but like I can imagine other people are getting them on a bigger scale, especially if I can imagine if your other family members speak Spanish. Like, my family members don't say anything to me because they don't speak Spanish. So like, they're not correcting my Spanish. They're not being like, your accent's terrible. They might say that again, I don't think anyone's saying that behind the scenes, but they could. I don't have other people to correct me like that. Yeah. And I can imagine other people who have maybe Spanish speaking family and they're trying to learn, they'll probably laugh or like joke, especially I think because that's how sometimes Latinos are. They'll like get at your weakness a little bit and make that your nickname. But no, I feel like I've been very supported. And so being able to feel more safe and comfortable, even speaking on Instagram in Spanish, or like, I forgot what I did in Spanish the other day, but even, just like little things like that has given me more confidence to keep doing it. Cause I think maybe that's why in the past, me trying to learn Spanish didn't stick, because the only intention was learning Spanish. And that was maybe what I was only open to. And now, because how hard it is to learn it, you have to have other motivations other than just to learn it. The other motivation is this is a form of resistance. This is a form of being able to communicate with my mom differently, or communicate with other people differently, or even just like being in your house and like knowing what you and your partner are saying, or knowing that you don't have to stay in English the whole time. Like, you can just switch to Spanish mid conversation, and I'm more or less still picking it up. And then you can switch back when you want. It feels more comfortable for me to know that you can also just like show up however you want, and I can still more or less put it together.
Yeah, no, it is all interconnected. Yeah, it is. Like, I am aware, because Spanglish and my brain is always like in the both end, that it is a huge effort to just assume that you speak Spanish, because visually what my brain is doing is like, oh, that person speaks Spanish, and they don't. And it's like, okay, no, say in English. And that for me, sometimes it's really hard. Yeah. Oh man, this is such a good conversation. La próxima vez va a ser en español.
Oh my gosh,
ya lo dijimos. It's gonna be in Spanish, but as we wrap up,
Temporada 4.
Temporada 4, un año más. En español. Hasta con tu mamá.
Sí, vamos a hacer juntas. Oh, wow. Yeah. Cool.
So, in season 4, we're gonna have talking in Spanish.
Oh my gosh, that would be so cool.
But as we wrap up, what do you think young Stacy, inner Niña, you would think about this journey that you're in? Like, what would be like the most like thing that version of you is amazed or like, what the hell? Surprise, shock that is happening. Yeah. So, what do you think?
I think of like more like high school version of me, like when I was like really trying to like learn Spanish and like I think realizing that because I remember like realizing that I was like Mexican in a way. Like I always knew I was Mexican, but I think it was like in the context of other people, or even like maybe high school to college, Stacy, because that was the first time I was in a state that was predominantly white, where it's like it's bigger than just who I am. It's bigger than just me like knowing how to speak Spanish. Like I don't even think I could have thought like that. Of like what it would mean, not just for me, but to my parents, you know, even to my like family. Like I always wonder even like what my like cousins think of it. Like again, no shame to them for not learning because they were in the same boat as me, right? Like yeah, even what they think about it, their curiosities. A lot of the reason why I like come back to Instagram because I typically don't like social media, but I think I want to show someone else who's in maybe two positions where I was, that they can do what I'm doing, whether it's being a therapist, whether it's being someone who's speaking Spanish, whether it's being someone just like existing as a Latina in the world and how like going to therapy, you know what I mean? There's so many parts of it that I think of, like even like my little self, I'm like, okay, like would she have even thought of, oh, that would be cool to speak in Spanish? I don't even think she was even thinking of it because I don't think the purpose felt the same. So I think she would think that that's cool. I think
she'd be like, what? We did that?
Yeah, I literally think they'd be like, where did that come from? That's so cool. Speaking to my grandparents, I think would have been a whole different experience because my grandpa also spoke Spanish in the house. And I remember he'd always be like, hola chula, ¿cómo estás? And I would answer like, bien. Like I knew that, but like I didn't know how to communicate to him, or even my dad's parents now, even communicating to them now. I wonder if we would have known Spanish, how that would have changed the relationship dynamics when I was younger. Of like, would I feel closer to them, or would there be some type of, you know, would there be more hesitancy, or like how would that have been? Yeah, I don't even think little Stacey would have had any idea what to think about it because I don't even think she thought about it. I don't know, maybe thinking of it was more normal not to speak Spanish, right? So like it would have been more like, oh, why are you the only one speaking Spanish when no one else does? So I think she might have just been too shy, which I think like that was me into most of adulthood of wanting to speak Spanish is like, oh no, it would have been too shy. Like now I have more confidence because I could speak it more. But anytime people are like, well, yeah, what made you want to speak Spanish? Or I want to speak Spanish. How did you do it? You literally just have to make yourself really uncomfortable and just literally speak it. Don't do Duolingo. I know people do Duolingo.
But you're talking about immersion because you're talking about beyond translation. You're talking about beyond what does this word mean with this word. You're talking about the cultural, the spirit shift that you're having inside. Your soul is shifting to understand yourself through this other lens.
Yeah. And that's why I was like, I don't think little Stacy would have ever even imagined all of the layers to doing something like quote unquote as simple as learning Spanish, like what it means. But
your tia legacy, what do you think?
Oh yeah,
as we become ancestors, and the next generations come up, and we get to be this tia, this role models. Like, what is the legacy that you're hoping to leave, even to our audience, like as they're listening to you, and maybe they find themselves like wanting to explore this? Like, what is the legacy and the advice that you're leaving for folks?
I think just to honestly, like you need to be ready for things you don't know that are going to happen. Again, if I was just trying to learn Spanish and that's it, I don't think I would have been open to half the experiences that I had, because then I would have been, I think, too self-conscious about doing most things. Yeah, I think it's like, I don't know, like knowing like my legacy that I want to pass to my, you know, as a tia or as even just like a friend too, right? Like the amiguis, like wanting to be ready for a lot of different experiences, and also to just really make sure you have a support team for that. Because again, I think that's been the most helpful thing, is having a supportive environment to do all of this work. And that's how me and you connected, where it's like we didn't really know each other like that, but we jumped in right away
over tacos.
Yeah, where I'm like, let's go eat, right? Over food, right? Like, oh, there's a really good Mexican spot, let's go. These sandwiches aren't great, like let's go somewhere else. And just immediately, you know, having that connection with you of like, okay, I feel safe talking about this with somebody, and you're having your different experience, I'm having my different experience, but like we're just learning from each other together. And I think that's helped me to not just like want to speak for myself, but also to like advocate for other people who have different backgrounds and different experiences that don't have the same privileges that I do. I think like that, and that's how me speaking Spanish started. I wanted to provide access and resources to people who historically or in the past have not been able to, like, not have therapy, not be able to, emote in the language that they want to emote it. I think maybe then, like, knowing that it's bigger than you, like, really, that's it. And that all the discomfort, all the discomfort, all the joy for sure, but all the discomfort that comes along with that, you have to be, like, in a weird way, this sounds weird, like, open to your own experience of it. Because
it's
if
like
you try
to know yourself.
Yeah, because if you try to, like, resist those parts, like, they'll find you. Like, they'll come up afterwards, being open to, like, the different. I think you had said it one of the first times we met of, like, LA is such, like, a Mexican experience that we, like, sometimes omit other, right? Because it's so like, there's so many other Latinos in LA that are not just Mexican. Even just, like, learning about those types of things, of wanting those and having to learn that about myself, and the discomfort of kind of like, oh yeah, I really have just focused on this experience when it really is everybody else's experience. And, like, especially again this week with ICE, it's like, oh no, it's everybody's experience, right? And the discomfort and, like, privilege of getting to, like, learn that and do different. If I would have just stuck to literally learning words and memorizing, I would have missed out on all of these things. I feel really, I don't know, I happy to know now. It's
mean, I'm just thinking about we're about to end the interview. We're about to go eat Salvadorian food because I just assumed that you had all these experiences in LA with Salvadorian food. So when we realized that you hadn't,
I was like, no, I've never had.
Vamos a ir a comer pupusas, tamales, pastelitos, yuca, and explaining all of that was so exciting yesterday. And then today we get to go have even more cultural experiences. And literally our first time that we hang out was over food. You took me to a Mexican place that you consider, like, very
delicious.
Authentic.
Sonora Town. Yeah, that's where my grandma, like, the area my grandma was from. Yeah.
And today I get to take you to a spot.
Oh, that's a nice little circle moment.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Another episode of Entre Tías y Amiguis. So much to converse about. We will have part 2 at some point.
Oh my God, that's so crazy.
But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hopefully some of you are encouraged to investigate.
Reach out to me.
Yeah, reach out to us.
Post the socials.
I'm here like, oh, you want to talk in Spanish? You want to do therapy in Spanish? Oh, let's do it.
Let's do it. It's been a really cool experience.
Thank you so much for sharing it all with us. And until next time, bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your tías and amiguis. Your support helps us reach more people and continue these important conversations. And don't forget to follow us on social media and stay connected. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself, embrace your journey, and keep living life with heart, vision, and creativity.